Everyone in Nocturith believed the Vampire King's daughter had been born completely blind. For centuries, no one questioned it. Not the castle physicians, not the ancient scholars, not even King Lucian himself. She lived in perpetual darkness, cut off from the world of sight, hidden away in a fortress built on sorrow and candlelight. But everything changed the night a new maid was summoned from the mortal realm. She wasn't a healer or a mystic, just someone who paid attention. What she noticed during her quiet service in the shadowed halls would unravel centuries of enchantment, challenge an immortal king's desperate choices, and bring to light a truth that had been sealed since the night the little princess first opened her eyes. What began as simple duty turned into a dangerous quest, and what she uncovered would shock everyone, especially the father who thought he had done everything to protect his only child. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We'd love to know. King Lucian Valamon was an immortal ruler feared across realms, known throughout the supernatural world for his iron will and merciless reign. But behind the legend of his power, he lived a very different existence within his castle walls. He resided in Valamont Castle, a massive Gothic fortress isolated in the perpetual twilight of Nocturith, where he dwelt alone with his daughter, Arya. The castle was magnificent, with towering stone archways, crimson tapestries depicting ancient battles, vast halls lit by thousands of candles, and endless corridors that seemed to breathe with shadows. Yet despite its grandeur, it felt frozen in grief, more tomb than home. Lucian had lost his beloved wife, Queen Isolde, during a blood eclipse centuries ago, on the very night Princess Arya was born. That catastrophic event had shattered something fundamental in him. He had withdrawn from the vampire courts, refused diplomatic summons, and severed ties with allied kingdoms, not because he sought solitude, but because he could no longer bear the weight of the outside world. His entire existence now revolved around Arya. She was the only being in all the realms he truly cared for, and he devoted every waking hour to ensuring her safety and comfort. But Arya's condition made his devotion feel like an endless, impossible task. From the moment of her birth, it was believed she had been born blind, her eyes pale as winter moonlight, never focusing on anything before her. Lucian blamed himself for the curse, convinced that Isolde's death and Arya's blindness were divine punishment for his defiance of celestial law. His nights were consumed with ancient routines, heavy silence, and constant dread about what would become of her when he could no longer protect her. Despite filling the castle with enchanted tools, rare artifacts meant to stimulate her senses, and summoning healers from every corner of the known world, Arya showed little response to any of it. Lucian had called upon witches, mystics, and even angels in disguise, hoping someone might reach through the veil that separated his daughter from the world. But nothing changed. Arya rarely spoke. She didn't play with toys. She never smiled or laughed. Most of her time was spent sitting motionless in her high-backed velvet chair near the arched window of her chamber, feeling the cool night breeze against her skin, and listening to the distant howling of wolves in the forest below. Her eyes, though sightless, always stared into the void, never settling on any object or person. It was as though she existed in a dimension no one else could enter, trapped behind an invisible wall. Lucian often positioned himself across the chamber, silently watching her for hours, drowning in helplessness. He read to her from ancient grimoires, told her stories of her mother's grace and beauty, even played haunting melodies on a centuries-old violin. But she rarely reacted. Only occasionally would she tilt her head slightly, or her pale lips would twitch in what might have been the ghost of a frown. Those fleeting gestures were all Lucian had to cling to. He wondered endlessly whether she recognized his voice, whether she felt anything at all, or if she was lost forever in the cursed fog that consumed her mind. At over 8 centuries old, King Lucian looked like a man in his early 40s, though weariness had aged his features beyond even immortal endurance. His long silver hair, once pristine, now fell unkempt past his shoulders. His crimson eyes, which had once burned with conquest and passion, now seemed dim, shadowed by grief. His movements were deliberate and slow, like a man carrying the weight of empires on his spine. He had distanced himself from old allies, ignored invitations to blood councils, and delegated ruling responsibilities to his advisors. He couldn't bring himself to leave Arya's side for more than a few hours. Every evening, he followed the same sacred ritual. He would help Arya dress in her soft gowns, prepare a modest meal of warmed milk and honey cakes, and guide her gently through the castle's cold stone halls. He tried endlessly to reach her through textures: silk, rough bark from the garden, cool metal, through scents of night-blooming jasmine and burning sage, through music both sorrowful and sweet. but nothing penetrated the wall around her. There were moments when rage consumed him, when he shouted at the heavens, cursed the gods who had taken Isolde and left him with this unbearable burden. He often knelt beside Arya's chair and whispered broken apologies, as if she could hear the anguish bleeding from his immortal heart. Even with all his ancient power, all his forbidden knowledge and accumulated wealth, he could not undo what he saw as the greatest failure of his endless life, his daughter's suffering and her impenetrable silence. The castle staff was small and carefully chosen, bound by blood oaths to discretion. They respected Lucian's need for privacy, and rarely spoke unless summoned. Most had served the Valamont family for generations, watching Arya grow through the years without any visible change. They whispered among themselves in the servants' quarters, sharing observations about small, strange details, how the princess sometimes hummed wordless melodies in the dead of night, or how she always reached for the same stuffed raven doll each evening before sleep. But to Lucien, these fragments felt like cruel reminders of what might have been. He yearned for more. He wanted to hear her speak his name with recognition, to see her smile with joy, to know that somewhere behind those pale, unseeing eyes, his daughter was truly present and aware. Sometimes he would sit beside her for hours, speaking aloud about his day, recounting memories of Isolde's laughter, or describing the way moonlight painted silver across the valley beyond their walls. He desperately hoped that something he said might pierce through the veil, that one word might unlock the prison holding her captive. But Arya remained mostly still and silent, offering only the occasional slight nod or turn of her head. Lucien clung to those tiny signs like a drowning man clutches driftwood, praying they meant more than they appeared to. The castle itself had become a monument to everything Lucien had lost. It was vast enough to house an entire court, yet only 2 souls inhabited its endless chambers. Every room carried the ghost of memory or the shadow of hope that never fully materialized. The nursery remained exactly as Queen Isolde had designed it before Arya's birth: soft lavender walls, hand-painted stars across the ceiling, a rocking chair positioned near the cradle, delicate curtains that had never been opened. Lucien had forbidden anyone from altering a single detail after the eclipse. Sometimes he stood in the doorway for what felt like hours, drowning in memories he refused to release. Arya had never shown any interest in that room. She never explored the castle's many wings, never asked questions about the portraits lining the halls, never seemed to comprehend the world that surrounded her. Lucien had accepted this strange, suffocating existence as his eternal penance. Yet deep in the parts of himself he dared not examine, he still believed something might shift. He studied every new theory on mystical afflictions, consulted with scholars from distant lands, and attempted experimental rituals drawn from forbidden texts. But each attempt ended in the same crushing disappointment. Still, he refused to surrender completely. And so the centuries continued in their slow, agonizing rhythm. Lucien remained bound to Arya, though he barely rested and rarely knew peace. He still guided her pale hand during meals, held her carefully as they walked through the moonlit garden, and whispered bedtime stories in a voice thick with pain and undying love. Arya remained silent and distant, her porcelain face showing almost no expression, her blank gaze forever fixed on nothing. Yet every so often she would lean her head against his chest for just a moment. Those rare gestures gave Lucien the strength to endure another day, another year, another century if necessary. He didn't know what fate had planned, but he had made an unbreakable vow to protect her no matter the cost. In that lonely fortress shrouded in eternal dusk, King Lucien Valamon lived each night for the silent girl who never demanded anything, never complained, never wept. His daughter Arya, who sat so quietly in her velvet chair, always with that same empty, haunting stare. Elsa Love was 23 years old and had recently endured one of the darkest periods any mortal soul could face. She had lost her younger sister to a wasting illness just months before, watching helplessly as fever consumed the only family she had left in the world. The village healers couldn't explain what had gone wrong, and the days following her sister's death were filled with unbearable silence, grief, and a hollow ache that wouldn't fade. Elsa lived in a small cottage on the outskirts of Holenmere, a forgotten border village where humans and supernatural creatures maintained an uneasy truce. She had no living relatives, no close friends who hadn't drifted away after the tragedy, and survived by taking whatever work she could find to pay for bread and firewood. She discovered the housekeeping position at Valamont Castle, in a worn notice posted outside the village tavern, while sitting on a bench waiting for the rain to stop. The castle swallowed Elsa whole the moment she crossed its threshold. Her first week at Valamont was spent learning the rhythms of a place that seemed to exist outside of time itself. The head steward, a gaunt vampire named Gregor with hollow cheeks and eyes like tarnished silver, showed her the daily routines with clipped efficiency. Clean the grand hall before moonrise. Polish the brass candelabras until they gleamed like captured starlight. Prepare fresh linens for the princess's chamber. Never speak unless spoken to. Never ask questions about the family. Never, under any circumstances, enter the east wing without permission. That last rule, Elsa noticed, was repeated more than once. The castle felt less like a home and more like an elaborate mausoleum, a place built to house the dead rather than the living. Every footstep echoed too loudly against the stone floors. Every shadow seemed to watch her pass. The air itself tasted of old sorrow, thick and metallic, like blood left too long in a chalice. Tapestries depicting ancient battles hung motionless on the walls, their threads faded but their images still vivid, fangs bared, crimson spilled, kingdoms conquered. The other servants moved through the halls like ghosts themselves, speaking in hushed tones and avoiding eye contact. There were only 5 others besides Gregor, 2 vampire maids who worked the lower chambers, a human cook who never left the kitchens, a groundskeeper who tended the night gardens, and an ancient steward who managed the king's private study. None of them lingered in the east wing. None of them spoke of Princess Arya, except in careful whispers, when they thought no one was listening. The princess doesn't like noise, one of the vampire maids told Elsa on her 3rd night, her pale fingers trembling as she arranged silverware. She doesn't like being touched. She doesn't like much of anything, really. Have you ever spoken to her? Elsa asked quietly. The maid's eyes widened with something close to fear. We don't go into her chambers. That's your responsibility now. The king insisted on a human for her care. He thinks... She trailed off, glancing toward the corridor that led to the east wing. He thinks mortal warmth might reach her. But the way she said it made clear she believed no such thing was possible. Elsa's duties brought her to Arya's chamber every evening just after twilight. The princess's rooms occupied the highest floor of the east tower, accessible only by a spiraling stone staircase that seemed to climb forever. By the time Elsa reached the heavy oak door, her legs ached and her breath came short, but she always paused before entering, steadying herself for what waited inside. The chamber was beautiful in a haunting, sorrowful way. Velvet curtains the color of deep wine framed the arched windows. Candles burned in iron sconces along the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows across oil paintings of long-dead royalty. A 4-poster bed draped in silver silk dominated one corner, and near the window sat the high-backed chair where Arya spent most of her hours. And there, every evening, was the princess herself. Arya never moved when Elsa entered. She sat perfectly still, her small hands folded in her lap, her pale blonde hair cascading over her shoulders like moonlight frozen in time. Her eyes, those strange, milky white eyes, stared toward the window but saw nothing. At least, that's what everyone believed. But Elsa was beginning to notice things. It started with small observations, details so subtle she almost dismissed them as imagination. The way Arya's head would tilt ever so slightly when shadows shifted across the floor, how her fingers would hover near objects, a hairbrush, a book, a glass of water, as if sensing their presence before touching them. During Elsa's 2nd week, while arranging fresh flowers in a crystal vase, she watched Arya's nostrils flare delicately, and the princess turned her face toward the blooms before Elsa had even set them down. "Do you like jasmine?" Elsa asked softly. Arya said nothing, but her lips parted slightly, as if tasting the question. The moment that changed everything happened during a quiet supper in Arya's chamber. Elsa had brought a tray of warmed milk, honey cakes, and sliced pears arranged on silver dishes. She was setting the tray on the small table near Arya's chair when her hand slipped. A silver spoon clattered against the plate, spinning once before falling still. The sound wasn't particularly loud, barely more than a soft chime in the vast chamber. But Arya flinched. Not at the noise. Elsa was certain of that, but as though she had seen the flash of candlelight reflecting off the spinning silver. Her head jerked slightly to the side, her shoulders tensed, and for just an instant, her pale eyes seemed to track the spoon's movement before going blank again. Elsa's heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced toward the doorway, but no one was there. Slowly, carefully, she knelt beside Arya's chair. "Did you see that?" she whispered. Arya remained motionless, her expression empty as always, but Elsa could have sworn she saw the faintest tremor in the girl's jaw. That night, as Elsa was leaving the chamber with the supper tray, King Lucian appeared in the corridor. He materialized from the shadows so suddenly that Elsa nearly dropped the dishes. His crimson eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "How does she fare?" His voice was low, measured, but carried an edge like a blade pressed against skin. "She ate a little, Your Majesty," Elsa replied, keeping her gaze respectfully lowered. She seems peaceful. Peaceful. Lucian repeated the word as if it tasted bitter. He moved closer, and Elsa could feel the ancient power radiating from him like heat from a forge. Tell me, Elsa love, have you noticed anything unusual about my daughter? The question hung in the air like a trap. Elsa's mind raced. Should she mention the spoon? The way Arya seemed to sense things she shouldn't be able to? The instinct to speak the truth warred with the fear of overstepping. No, Your Majesty, she finally said. Nothing unusual. Lucian studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped even closer, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. Good, because if you were to notice anything, I would advise you to keep such observations to yourself. There are matters beyond mortal reason at work in this castle, girl. Matters you cannot possibly understand. Do not meddle in affairs that do not concern you. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. Elsa nodded quickly. Of course, Your Majesty. But as Lucian turned and disappeared back into the shadows, Elsa felt something stir inside her. Not fear, but a fierce, protective warmth. She had seen that same kind of isolation before, that same suffocating loneliness in her sister's eyes during those final days. And she had promised herself she would never stand by silently again. Later that night, as Elsa walked past Arya's chamber on her way to the servants' quarters, she heard something that made her freeze mid-step, humming, soft and melodic, barely audible through the heavy oak door. A lullaby with no words, haunting and sweet, sung in a voice that should have been silent. Elsa pressed her ear against the wood, her breath catching. She had never heard Arya make a sound like that. According to the other servants, the princess never sang, never hummed, never made any music at all. So who had taught her that song? Elsa pulled back from the door, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. She glanced up and down the empty corridor, then whispered to herself, so quietly it was almost lost in the darkness. You're not blind, are you? The humming stopped. The silence that followed Elsa's whisper felt alive, pressing against her like a physical weight. She stood frozen in the corridor, her ear still inches from Arya's door, waiting for the humming to resume. But the castle had gone deathly quiet, as if even the shadows were holding their breath. After several long moments, Elsa forced herself to step back. Her hands trembled as she gathered her skirts and hurried toward the servants' quarters, her mind racing with possibilities she barely dared to consider. Sleep eluded her that night. She lay on her narrow cot, staring at the ceiling beams, replaying every interaction with the princess over and over. The tilted head, the hovering fingers, the flinch at the spinning spoon, the humming. By the time dawn's first gray light crept through her small window, Elsa had made a decision. She needed to know the truth, and she needed to be careful. Over the next 3 days, Elsa began her experiments. They started small, innocuous enough that anyone watching would see nothing more than a maid going about her duties. On the first day, while tidying Arya's chamber, Elsa moved slowly past the princess's chair, waving her hand directly in front of those pale, unseeing eyes. Arya's expression remained blank, her gaze fixed on nothing. No reaction, no flicker of recognition, just the same empty stare she always wore. Elsa tried again, this time snapping her fingers near Arya's face. Still nothing. The princess might as well have been carved from marble. She attempted different approaches throughout the day, dropping a handkerchief, moving objects across Arya's field of vision, even standing directly in her line of sight, and moving side to side. Each time Arya remained perfectly motionless, her white eyes never tracking, never focusing, never showing the slightest awareness. But Elsa had learned to trust her instincts, and something told her she was testing the wrong conditions. On the second evening, she waited until the usual time for Arya's supper. The princess sat in her customary position by the window, motionless as always. Elsa brought in the meal, warm broth, soft bread, honeyed tea, and set it carefully on the side table. Then, as if by accident, she began extinguishing candles throughout the chamber. "Forgive me, Your Highness," Elsa murmured, blowing out one sconce after another. "I need to replace these. They've been burning unevenly." The room grew darker with each flame that died. Shadows pooled in the corners like spilled ink. When only a single candle remained burning on the far side of the chamber, Elsa retrieved a small hand lantern from her apron pocket, the same one she used to navigate the castle's darker corridors. She moved to stand directly in front of Arya, holding the lantern at eye level. Then, very slowly, she raised it higher, watching the princess's face in the flickering amber light. At first, nothing. Arya remained perfectly still, her expression serene and empty. Then Elsa lowered the lantern, plunging Arya's face into deeper shadow. And in that moment, she saw it, a subtle but unmistakable contraction of the princess's pupils. They narrowed slightly, adjusting to the change in light, the way any seeing person's eyes would respond. Elsa's breath caught in her throat. Her hands began to shake, causing the lantern's flame to dance wildly. "Your Highness?" she whispered. Arya said nothing, but her head tilted ever so slightly, as if listening to something beyond Elsa's words. Emboldened, Elsa extinguished the lantern completely. The chamber plunged into near-total darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the single distant candle and the pale moonlight filtering through the window. Elsa waited, letting her own eyes adjust, and then she saw something that made her heart nearly stop. A shimmer. A faint blue luminescence reflecting in Arya's eyes, like starlight caught in ice. It lasted only a moment before fading, but it was there. Undeniable. Impossible. "Princess Arya," Elsa breathed, barely above a whisper. "Can you see me?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Then, so quietly Elsa almost missed it, Arya spoke. Her voice was soft and uncertain, like someone speaking a language they'd almost forgotten. "Sometimes I can see." In the dark, the words hit Elsa like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, catching herself against the wall, the lantern slipping from her trembling fingers and clattering to the floor. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the hushed chamber. "What do you mean?" Elsa managed, her voice shaking. "You can see right now?" But Arya had gone silent again, her expression returning to that same empty mask. The moment had passed, the confession withdrawn as quickly as it had been offered. Elsa stood there in the darkness, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of what she'd just heard. The next morning, Elsa sought out the castle physician. She found him in his cramped workroom near the kitchens. Surrounded by dusty bottles, hanging herbs, and ancient medical texts, Dr. Theron was an elderly vampire who had served the Valamont family for over 3 centuries. His hand shook slightly as he ground herbs with a mortar and pestle. "Forgive the intrusion, Doctor," Elsa began carefully, closing the door behind her. "I wanted to ask you about Princess Arya's condition." The grinding stopped immediately. Theron's hands froze, and he slowly turned to face her. The color, what little a vampire possessed, drained from his already pale face. "Her condition," he repeated flatly. "Yes, her blindness. I was wondering if perhaps—" "Do not," his voice cracked like breaking ice. "Do not continue that sentence, girl." Elsa took a step back, startled by the vehemence in his tone. "I only wanted to understand. The king forbids such talk." Theron set down his mortar with trembling hands and moved closer, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Do you understand? He forbids it. Those who ask questions about the princess's condition do not last long in this castle. They are dismissed, sent away. Or worse. Worse?" Elsa's mouth went dry. Theron's eyes darted toward the door, then back to her face. "There was a healer once, 10 years ago. She came from the southern covens, promised she could help the child. She asked too many questions, examined the princess too closely, suggested that perhaps the blindness was not natural. What happened to her? She disappeared." Theron's voice was barely audible now. "One night she was here, and by the next evening, her chambers were empty. No one speaks of her anymore. No one dares." A chill ran down Elsa's spine. "But if Arya could be helped, leave it alone." Theron gripped her arm with surprising strength. "For your own sake, girl. Do not meddle in affairs that transcend mortal understanding. The king has his reasons, and he will not tolerate interference." He released her and turned away. The conversation was over. That night, Elsa woke to footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Following an instinct she didn't understand, she made her way through the castle's passages. Dawn was approaching. She could feel it in the air's subtle shift. When she reached the east tower, she saw King Lucien standing in Arya's doorway, silhouetted against candlelight. The door was half open. Elsa pressed herself against the stone wall and watched. Lucien entered and knelt before his daughter. He raised his hand, pressing his thumb against Arya's forehead, and began murmuring in an ancient guttural language. A faint blue light emanated from beneath his thumb, pulsing with each syllable. Arya's body went rigid, her hands gripping the chair arms until her knuckles turned white. When Lucien removed his hand, a glowing symbol briefly marked Arya's forehead before fading. "Forgive me, my child," he whispered, his voice breaking. "But it must be done." Elsa fled before he could discover her heart threatening to burst. She made it back to her quarters, gasping. The incantation, the blue light, the mark. He was maintaining the spell, every single dawn. When she returned to Arya's chamber hours later, she found the princess in her usual place. But as Elsa drew closer, she noticed something that made her blood turn to ice. Beneath Arya's eyes were faint russet stains, dried tracks of blood tears, red as wine. Elsa spent the rest of that day in a fog of barely contained horror, going through the motions of her duties while her mind churned with dark revelations. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw those blood-red tear tracks on Arya's porcelain face. Every time she heard footsteps in the corridor, she tensed, expecting King Lucian to appear and drag her away for what she'd witnessed. But nothing happened. The castle continued its eternal rhythm, indifferent to her discovery. The other servants moved through their routines. Gregor gave her assignments in his usual clipped tone. The world carried on as if nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. Curiosity had become something more than simple interest. It had transformed into an obsession that gnawed at Elsa's thoughts like a hungry animal. She couldn't sleep without seeing Arya's rigid body as her father pressed that glowing mark into her forehead. She couldn't eat without wondering what those ancient words had meant, what power they wielded, what they were suppressing. Sometimes I can see in the dark. It must be done. It must always be done. The pieces of a terrible puzzle were scattered before her, and Elsa knew she wouldn't find peace until she understood what they formed. The physician's warning echoed in her mind. Those who asked questions didn't last long in this castle. But the alternative was returning to her life of ignorant service, pretending she'd seen nothing. While a child suffered under some dark enchantment night after night, Elsa had already lost everyone she loved. She'd watched her sister waste away while she stood helpless. She would not stand helpless again. The decision, once made, was irreversible. 3 nights later, when the castle had settled into its deepest silence, and even the vampire servants had retreated to their chambers, Elsa crept through the shadowed corridors toward the west wing. She knew the layout by now, had memorized which floorboards creaked and which passages were watched. King Lucien's private study lay at the end of a long gallery lined with portraits of long-dead Valamont ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress with cold disapproval. The study door was massive, carved from black oak and bound with iron that had gone green with age. Elsa had seen Lucian emerge from it several times, always looking more burdened than when he'd entered, as if the room itself added weight to his immortal shoulders. She pressed her ear against the wood, listening. Silence. Her trembling hand found the iron handle, and she pushed gently. To her shock, the door wasn't locked. It swung inward with a low groan that seemed impossibly. Loud in the quiet castle, Elsa slipped inside and eased the door closed behind. The study was exactly as she'd imagined it. An ancient room of black, marble and shadows that seemed to breathe. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined the walls, groaning under the weight of leather-bound volumes, rolled parchments, and artifacts that looked older than memory itself. A massive desk dominated the center of the room, its surface covered with scattered papers, ink-stained quills, and half-melted candles frozen in pools of wax. Moonlight filtered through a single arched window, casting silver bars across the floor. The air smelled of old paper, dried ink, and something else. Something metallic and faintly sweet that made Elsa's stomach turn. Blood, she realized. Old blood preserved in whatever dark rituals vampires performed. She moved carefully through the room, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. Most of the books appeared to be ledgers, histories, and diplomatic correspondence, the mundane business of ruling a kingdom. But on a shelf near the window, separated from the others and covered with a heavy cloth of midnight velvet, sat a single volume that seemed to pulse with its own dark energy. Elsa's hands shook as she reached for the cloth. She pulled it away slowly, revealing what lay beneath, the Codex Umbrae. The grimoire was bound in crimson leather. Not dyed, Elsa realized with growing horror, but something else. Something that had once been alive. The royal crest of House Valamont was burned into the cover, a crescent moon pierced by a sword, surrounded by thorns that seemed to writhe in the moonlight. Silver clasps held the book closed, inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Elsa's fingers trembled as she undid the clasps. They opened with soft clicks that sounded like breaking bones. The cover fell back, revealing pages so old and brittle they looked ready to crumble at a breath. The text was written in multiple languages. Some she recognized and many she didn't. But as she carefully turned the ancient pages, she found passages written in common tongue, as if someone had translated the most important sections for easier reference. The handwriting was elegant but anguished, the letters pressed deep into the parchment as if written with desperate force. Then, halfway through the tome, Elsa found it. A full-page illustration stopped her cold. It showed a young woman, no, a child, with flowing hair and eyes that blazed with light too bright to be contained by mere ink. Around her, vampires burned like candles, their bodies dissolving into ash. Above the image, written in script that seemed to shimmer with its own luminescence, were the words, "The Prophecy of Dawn's Heir." Elsa's eyes dropped to the text below. In the final age of the Valamont reign, When the blood moon wanes and the covenant grows weak, the heir of the ancient line shall be born bearing the cursed gift, the eyes of dawn. She shall see what no vampire has seen since the first curse fell upon our kind. She shall look upon the sun and not burn. She shall carry within her sight the power to end the eternal night. If her sight awakens before the blood eclipse completes its cycle, the balance shall shatter. The night will surrender to endless day. The king shall fall, and with him, all who bear the mark of darkness. The line of Valamont shall end in flames of her own making. Therefore, it is decreed by blood and shadow. The heir's sight must be sealed until the appointed time. Only through constant binding can the dawn be held at bay. Only through sacrifice can the kingdom endure. Elsa's hands had gone numb. She read the passage again, then a third time, each word sinking into her consciousness like a stone thrown into deep water. The eyes of dawn. The power to end the eternal night. Arya wasn't blind by birth or curse. She'd been born with sight, extraordinary sight, and Lucian had sealed it away. Every dawn he reinforced the enchantment, suppressing his daughter's gift to prevent the prophecy from coming true. The blood tears, the pain, the decades of isolation, all of it was deliberate. A father choosing his kingdom over his child, choosing the survival of his kind over the freedom of his daughter. Elsa turned the page with shaking hands and found a handwritten note in the margin, added long after the original text had been penned. She recognized Lucian's handwriting from the papers on his desk. I have seen the stars weep for what I have done. Each dawn I pray for forgiveness I do not deserve. But what choice was given to me? To watch my daughter burn in the light she was born to see, or to blind her and save us all? I chose darkness. I will always choose darkness. May the gods forgive me for the monster I have become in the name of love. Elsa closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the tragedy of it all. Lucian wasn't a villain keeping his daughter prisoner out of cruelty. He was a father caught in an impossible choice, sacrificing his child's happiness for the survival of his entire species. And yet the result was the same. Arya trapped in endless darkness, suffering under the weight of a spell renewed each dawn, never knowing the truth of what she was, never knowing she was meant to see the sun. Elsa was about to close the book when she noticed something else. Tucked between the pages near the end was a loose sheet of parchment, newer than the rest, covered in calculations and diagrams. At the top, in Lucian's desperate handwriting, were the words, Blood Eclipse Cycle, 347 years. Current year, 346, one more year. One more year and the prophecy will be void. One more year and she will be safe. What will King Lucian do when he discovers his spell is breaking? Will Elsa survive his fury? Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what happens next. Drop a like if you're Team Elsa, and comment if you think she's making the right choice. Now let's see what happens when Elsa confronts the king. One more year. Lucian had been holding back the dawn for centuries, and he was so close to breaking the curse permanently. Just one more year of suffering, and Arya would be free, though still blind, still trapped, still living in darkness. Would that be freedom? Elsa wondered. Or just another kind of prison? She was closing the codex, preparing to return it to its velvet shroud, when the air in the study suddenly grew cold. The candles on Lucian's desk flickered wildly despite the absence of any breeze. And then, from somewhere in the darkness between the shelves, came a whisper that raised every hair on Elsa's body. It was a voice like wind through dead leaves, neither male nor female, ancient and terrible and infinitely sad. Do not wake the dawn. Elsa spun around, her heart hammering, searching the shadows for the source. But she was alone. The study was empty, save for the books and the moonlight, and the terrible knowledge she now carried. She replaced the velvet cloth with trembling hands, and fled the study, not bothering to be quiet anymore. Behind her, the whisper echoed through the halls like a warning, or perhaps a plea. Do not wake the dawn. Elsa didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. The whisper from the study clung to her thoughts like cobwebs, and every time she closed her eyes, she saw the prophecy's illustration, vampires burning in the light of a child's awakened gaze. She lay on her cot, listening to the castle settle into its nocturnal rhythms, and tried to make sense of what she'd learned. Lucian wasn't a monster. He was a father trapped by fate, making an impossible choice every single dawn. And Arya wasn't cursed. She was extraordinary, powerful, dangerous. A child born to end the eternal night. Do not wake the dawn. But how could Elsa simply do nothing? How could she watch Arya suffer under that spell for another year, knowing the truth, the blood tears, the pain, the isolation? It was all deliberate suffering inflicted in the name of protection. Was that really love? Or was it just fear wearing love's mask? Elsa was still wrestling with these thoughts when the storm arrived. It came suddenly, violently, as if the sky itself had split open in rage. Thunder cracked like the breaking of worlds, so loud it shook the castle's foundations. Lightning illuminated the darkness in blinding white flashes, casting stark shadows that danced across the walls of Elsa's chamber. Rain hammered against the windows with the fury of 1,000 fists. And then, cutting through the chaos of the storm, Elsa heard it. A scream, high and piercing, filled with agony beyond anything mortal or immortal should endure. It came from the East Tower. Arya, Elsa threw off her blankets and ran. She didn't bother with a candle or lantern. The lightning provided enough illumination, flashing at irregular intervals like the pulse of a dying heart. Her bare feet slapped against cold stone as she raced through corridors and up the spiral staircase, her nightgown billowing behind her. The door to Arya's chamber stood open, swinging on its hinges with each gust of wind that howled through the castle. Elsa burst inside and froze. Arya was no longer sitting in her chair. She stood in the center of the room, her small body trembling violently, her pale hair whipping around her face as if caught in an invisible storm. But it was her eyes that stole Elsa's breath. They were glowing, not the faint shimmer Elsa had seen before, but a brilliant, pulsing blue light that illuminated her entire face. The white had been replaced by something luminous and terrible, like captured starlight fighting to break free. Princess. Elsa rushed forward, reaching for the child. Arya's head snapped toward her, those glowing eyes wide with terror and pain. "It hurts," she gasped, her voice raw. "It hurts so much." Then she screamed again, and blood began streaming from her eyes like crimson tears. Not a few drops, but rivers of red that ran down her pale cheeks and dripped onto her white nightgown, staining it with spreading blossoms of scarlet. "No, no, no." Elsa caught the child as Arya's legs gave out. She lowered them both to the floor, cradling the princess in her arms. I'm here. Hold on." Arya convulsed, her back arching, her small hands clawing at her own face. The blood kept coming, flowing faster now, pooling on the stone floor around them. Through it all, her eyes continued to glow with that terrible blue light, pulsing in rhythm with the lightning that split the sky outside. "Make it stop," Arya sobbed, her voice breaking. "Please make it stop." Elsa held her tighter, rocking her gently, whispering words of comfort she didn't believe. "You're going to be all right. I promise. Just breathe. Breathe with me." The convulsion lasted for what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes. Gradually the trembling subsided. The blue glow in Arya's eyes began to fade, dimming like a dying star, until only the familiar milky white remained. The blood flow slowed to a trickle, then stopped entirely. Arya went limp in Elsa's arms, gasping for breath. Her face was a mask of blood, her nightgown soaked through. But she was alive, conscious. "What did you see?" Elsa whispered, brushing blood-matted hair from the child's forehead. "During the pain, did you see anything?" For a long moment, Arya said nothing. Then in a voice barely louder than the dying storm outside, she spoke. "I saw it. The moon was red, and someone was burning." A chill ran down Elsa's spine that had nothing to do with the cold wind howling through the open window. "Who was burning?" "I don't know." Arya's unseeing eyes stared upward. Tears, clear ones now, mixing with the blood on her cheeks. "But they were screaming. And I think I knew them." Before Elsa could respond, footsteps thundered up the stairs. Heavy, rapid, furious, King Lucian burst into the chamber, his crimson eyes blazing with an intensity that made Elsa's blood freeze. He took in the scene with a single sweeping glance. His daughter covered in blood, held in the arms of the human maid, the glowing residue still faintly visible in the air. "What have you done?" His voice was deadly quiet, more terrifying than any shout. "Nothing. By the storm. She was screaming and I came. The seal is breaking." Lucian crossed the room in 3 swift strides and tore Arya from Elsa's arms. The child whimpered but didn't resist as her father examined her face, his hands shaking. "It's weakening. After all these years, it's finally weakening." He rounded on Elsa, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, she truly feared for her life. "You, what did you do? What did you touch? Where did you go?" "I didn't. Do not lie to me, mortal." Lucian's roar shook the chamber. The binding has held for 346 years without faltering. And now, mere weeks after you arrive, it begins to unravel. "What dark magic do you carry? What curse did you bring into my home?" "Your Majesty, I swear, I've done nothing." "Get out!" His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. "Pack your things. You will leave this castle before dawn, and you will never speak of what you've seen here. If you do, I will find you, and I will ensure you regret drawing breath." Elsa scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering. But before she could move toward the door, a small voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Father." Lucian froze. Elsa froze. The entire world seemed to freeze. Arya had spoken. Not to no one, not to the heir, but directly to her father. It was the first time Elsa had ever heard the child use that word. The first time, according to the whispered stories of the servants, that Arya had acknowledged Lucienne as anything more than a presence in her world. Lucienne slowly turned to his daughter, his expression cracking into something between hope and anguish. "Arya, don't send her away." The princess's voice was weak but clear. "Please, she's the only one who doesn't pretend I'm not here." The king's hands trembled as he held his daughter. For a long moment he stood there, torn between fear and something deeper. Finally he looked at Elsa, and the fury in his eyes had been replaced by exhaustion. "Go," he said quietly, "but stay in the castle. We will speak more of this tomorrow." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't banishment either. Elsa nodded and fled the chamber, her mind reeling. Behind her she heard Lucienne whispering to his daughter in that ancient language, trying to reinforce the seal that was beginning to crack. Back in her quarters, Elsa washed the blood from her hands and stared at her reflection in the small mirror above her wash basin. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear and determination in equal measure. The curse was unraveling. The prophecy was stirring, and somehow, Elsa had become part of something far larger and more dangerous than she could have imagined. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and whispered the words that would seal her fate. "I'll find a way to help you see, truly see." The summons came at dusk, delivered by Gregor with his usual efficiency, and a look that suggested Elsa was walking toward her own execution. "His Majesty requests your presence in the throne chamber, immediately." Elsa's hands had been shaking all day, ever since the storm, ever since holding Arya's trembling body as blood streamed from her eyes. She'd spent the hours replaying that moment over and over, the glowing blue light, the convulsions, the vision of something burning beneath a red moon, and Arya's voice, small and broken, speaking her father's name for the first time. Now, as Elsa descended the grand staircase toward the heart of the castle, she felt the weight of what was coming. This wasn't going to be a dismissal or a warning. This was going to be a reckoning. The throne chamber was a cathedral of darkness. Vaulted ceilings disappeared into shadow far above. Columns of black marble rose like ancient trees, carved with scenes of conquest and bloodshed. And at the far end of the vast hall, elevated on a dais of obsidian steps, sat the throne itself, a massive seat hewn from a single piece of midnight stone, its arms carved into the shapes of wolves mid-leap. But it was the torches that caught Elsa's attention. They lined the walls in iron sconces, dozens of them, and every single flame burned blue. Not the natural blue of intense heat, but an otherworldly azure that cast strange shadows and made the air taste of winter and magic. King Lucian sat upon his throne, motionless as a statue. He'd changed from his blood-stained clothes into ceremonial robes of deep crimson and black, his silver hair falling loose around his shoulders. His crimson eyes tracked Elsa's approach, with an intensity that made her want to flee back up the stairs. But she didn't. She walked forward, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, until she stood at the base of the dais. "Your Majesty," her voice barely carried in the vast chamber. "You want to know the truth." It wasn't a question. Lucian's voice was flat, drained of the fury that had possessed him the night before. "You went into my study. You read the codex, and now you think you understand." Elsa's breath caught. "I didn't mean to. Do not insult me with lies." Lucienne rose from his throne, descending the steps with deliberate slowness. "The codex bears protections. I knew the moment you touched it. I've known all along what you've been doing, Maid. Your little experiments, your questions to the physician, your observations of my daughter." He reached the bottom step and stopped, towering over her. "I let you continue because Arya spoke my name. For the first time in 3 centuries, my daughter acknowledged my existence. So I will give you what you seek. I will tell you everything. And then you will understand why what you're doing is not compassion. It is murder." Elsa swallowed hard but held her ground. "I'm listening." Lucian turned away, walking toward one of the blue flame torches. 700 years ago, when the first Valamont king rose from death to claim immortality, a bargain was struck with the moon goddess. She who rules the night, she who gave us our power. In exchange for eternal life, for dominion over darkness, for strength beyond mortal comprehension, we made a sacred oath. He touched the torch, and the flame danced higher. No heir of our blood would ever see the light of day until the appointed time. Until the blood eclipse completed its cycle and the covenant was renewed. For 699 years, this was no burden. Every Valamont child was born with eyes suited to darkness, perfectly adapted to our eternal night. Lucian's voice grew heavy. Then Isolde conceived, my beloved queen, the only being I ever loved before Arya. The pregnancy was difficult. The night she went into labor, the blood eclipse began, a celestial event that occurs once every 347 years, when the moon itself turns red, and the barrier between our world and the divine realm grows thin. He turned back to face Elsa, and she saw anguish carved into every line of his immortal face. Isolde died bringing Arya into this world, and when the child opened her eyes for the first time, they burned. Not with vampire crimson, but with light. Golden light, like captured sunrise. The midwife screamed. The physician fled. And I held my newborn daughter and knew with absolute certainty that she would destroy us all. The eyes of dawn, Elsa whispered. Yes. Lucien's hands clenched into fists. The prophecy made flesh. The one thing the moon goddess warned against. If an heir's sight awakened before the blood eclipse cycle completed, the covenant would shatter. My daughter wasn't born blind, Elsa. She was born with the power to see what no vampire has witnessed in a millennium. She could look upon the sun itself and not burn. And in doing so, she would bring endless day to a kingdom built on eternal night. He began pacing, his robe sweeping across the stone floor. I panicked. The court demanded I kill the child, destroy the abomination before she could doom us all. But she was my daughter, Isolde's final gift. I couldn't. So I searched every forbidden text, consulted every dark oracle, until I found the binding spell, a way to seal her sight without taking her life. So you blinded her, Elsa said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Condemned her to darkness to save yourself, to save my people. Lucian's roar echoed through the chamber. Do you understand what would happen if her eyes fully awakened? Every vampire in Nocturith would burn, thousands of souls, centuries of civilization, entire bloodlines reduced to ash. And for what? So one child could see a sunrise? She's suffering, Elsa shot back. Every day, every dawn, you hurt her. You think I don't know that? Lucian's voice cracked. You think I don't hear her whimpers through the walls? You think I sleep peacefully knowing what I do to my own daughter every morning? The binding requires renewal. Without it, the seal weakens. Without it, she awakens. And when she awakens fully, the prophecy fulfills itself. He stepped closer, his eyes boring into hers. One more year, Elsa. One more year and the blood eclipse cycle completes. The covenant renews. And Arya will be safe, truly safe forever. The binding can be made permanent. She'll never have to suffer again. She'll still be blind, Elsa said quietly. She'll be alive. My kingdom will be alive. That is the choice before us. Lucian's voice dropped to barely a whisper. If her eyes open before then, the night will end. And everyone I've sworn to protect will die screaming in light they were never meant to see. Silence fell between them, heavy as stone. Finally, Elsa found her voice. You call it protection, she said, meeting his crimson gaze without flinching. I call it blindness. Lucian's expression hardened. Then you understand nothing of love or sacrifice. I understand a father too afraid to let his daughter be what she was born to be. The words hung in the air like a blade. Lucian stared at her for a long moment, then turned away. Get out, he said quietly. Before I forget that my daughter spoke on your behalf. Elsa left the throne chamber with her heart pounding, knowing she'd just crossed a line from which there was no return. Elsa didn't return to her quarters after leaving the throne chamber. Instead, she walked the castle's endless corridors in a daze, Lucian's words echoing in her mind like a curse. One more year and she'll be safe, blind, trapped, still suffering under a spell renewed every dawn, still isolated in darkness, still never knowing the truth of what she was meant to be. That was Lucian's version of salvation, a life sentence disguised as protection. Elsa thought of her sister's final days, watching helplessly as illness consumed her. She'd promised herself then that she would never stand idle again while someone suffered. Never again would she choose silence over action, safety over what was right. The decision crystallized in her heart, like ice forming on still water. She was going to break the curse. That night, when the castle slept, Elsa returned to Lucian's study. Her hands didn't shake this time as she opened the door. Fear had transformed into something harder, more resolute. She moved directly to the velvet-covered shelf and retrieved the Codex Umbrae, no longer caring about the protective enchantments that marked her intrusion. She carried the grimoire to a deeper part of the castle, the catacombs beneath the throne chamber, where ancient Valamont kings lay entombed in stone sarcophagi. No one came here. Even the vampire servants avoided these halls, where the weight of centuries pressed down like physical force. By candlelight, Elsa paged through the codex until she found what she sought. Past the prophecy, past Lucian's anguished notes, there was another section, older, written in the same hand that had penned the original binding. The reversal of Dawn's seal. The ritual was complex, requiring precise timing and components that made Elsa's stomach turn. Blood from the sealed one, Arya's blood. Blood from one who believed in her awakening, Elsa's own. A circle drawn in ash from burned moonflowers. And words of power spoken at the exact moment between night and dawn. When the world balanced on the edge of transformation, Elsa copied the incantation onto a scrap of parchment with trembling hands, committing every symbol to memory. She was gathering the codex to leave when she heard it. A voice, soft as silk, coming from the shadows between the tombs. You would free her. Elsa spun, her candle nearly guttering out. At first she saw nothing. Then a figure emerged from the darkness. Not solid, but translucent, shimmering like moonlight on water. A woman in flowing robes, her face beautiful and sad. Her eyes the same pale gold Arya's must have been at birth. Queen Isolde, Elsa breathed. The ghost smiled. You see truly, child. I have watched you these past weeks. Watched you care for my daughter with the gentleness she has never known. The specter drifted closer. My husband is a good man trapped in an impossible choice. But he chose wrong. He chose fear over faith, darkness over light. Don't make his mistake. The ritual, Elsa began. I will guide you when the time comes. But be warned, the castle has eyes. Lucian's eyes. You must move quickly. The ghost reached out as if to touch Elsa's face, her translucent hand passing through flesh like cold wind. Free my daughter. Let her see the world I never could show her. Let her be what she was born to be. Then Isolde faded, leaving only the whisper of her final words. Save her. Elsa clutched the codex and turned to leave the catacombs. But as she reached the stairs, torchlight blazed above. Heavy footsteps descended. She tried to retreat, but more guards appeared from the passages behind her, cutting off escape. Gregor emerged from the stairwell, his face impassive. The king has ordered your arrest. The codex, if you please. No. Elsa backed away, but vampire hands seized her arms with inhuman strength. The grimoire was torn from her grasp. Take her to the dungeons, Gregor commanded. His Majesty will decide her fate at dawn. The dungeon was everything Elsa had feared, a place of eternal darkness and despair, carved into the bedrock beneath the castle. Iron bars separated cells where tormented souls had once languished. Now most stood empty, monuments to forgotten suffering. They threw her into the deepest cell and locked the door with a sound like breaking bones. Elsa sank to the cold floor, her brief rebellion crushed before it could even begin. She'd failed. The codex was gone. Dawn was approaching, and Lucian would ensure she never came near Arya again. Foolish girl. The voice came from the cell beside hers. Elsa looked up to see an ancient vampire, so old his skin had turned translucent, revealing the delicate network of veins beneath. His eyes were clouded with cataracts, his fangs worn to nubs. Who are you? Elsa whispered. I am Matthias, once scholar to the Valamont court. I asked too many questions about the princess, just as you have. That was 30 years ago. 30 years in here? Time means little to immortals. Matthias moved closer to the bars separating their cells. But I learned something during my imprisonment. Something the king doesn't understand. He studied her with those milky eyes. You carry the light he fears. Not magic, not power. Something simpler and more dangerous. Belief. You believe she should be free. And belief, child, is the most potent magic of all. It doesn't matter now, Elsa said bitterly. They took the codex. The ritual is lost. Is it? Matthias smiled, revealing those worn fangs. Or did you already memorize what you needed? Elsa's breath caught. The incantation. The symbols. She'd studied them, committed them to memory before the guards arrived. Matthias reached through the bars, pressing something into her hand. A key, old and rusty but still functional. My jailer was careless 30 years ago. I've kept this hidden, waiting for someone worthy of freedom. Take it, the guard rotation changes at dawn. You'll have minutes, no more. Why help me? Because I loved Isolde once before she chose Lucian, and I made her a promise that if her daughter ever needed saving, I would do whatever I could. His clouded eyes glistened. Keep that promise for me. As the first gray light of approaching dawn filtered through a high window, Elsa unlocked her cell. She moved like a ghost through the dungeon corridors, and miraculously encountered no guards. Perhaps Isolde's spirit was clearing her path. Perhaps fate itself had decided to intervene. She emerged into the lower castle and found it, a single candle left burning in a wall sconce, its flame pure white, lit by moonlight that had somehow found its way into these shadowed halls. Elsa took the candle, its light steady in her trembling hand, and whispered the words that would seal her fate. If darkness fears the light, then I will bring it to her. Elsa reached Arya's chamber as the first tremors of dawn approached. The princess sat in her chair, exactly where she always sat, her pale eyes staring at nothing. But when Elsa entered, Arya's head turned with startling precision. "You came back," the child whispered. "I heard them take you away. I thought, we don't have much time." Elsa knelt before her, taking those small, cold hands. "Arya, do you trust me?" The princess hesitated, then nodded. "You're the only one who sees me. Then come. I'm going to help you truly see." They fled through the castle's passages as distant thunder rumbled, another storm gathering, as if the heavens themselves knew what was about to unfold. Elsa led Arya down into the catacombs where Isolde's ghost had appeared. The ancient tombs seemed to pulse with anticipation. There, carved into the stone floor between the sarcophagi, Elsa found it, a circle of symbols older than the castle itself, remnants of magic from the first binding. She positioned Arya at its center and retrieved a piece of broken stone, using it to draw connecting lines in ash she'd gathered from the burned moonflowers in the castle's night garden. "What's happening?" Arya asked, her voice trembling. "Freedom," Elsa whispered. She pulled a small knife from her apron and pressed it against her palm, drawing blood. The red drops fell onto the circle, and the ancient symbols began to glow with faint blue light. Elsa began the incantation, the words feeling foreign and powerful on her tongue. The air grew heavy, electric. Arya gasped as the circle's light intensified, crawling up her body like living flame. Then the catacomb doors exploded inward. Lucian stood in the entrance, his face a mask of fury and terror. Lightning from the storm above split the sky visible through cracks in the ancient ceiling. "Stop this madness." "I can't," Elsa said, continuing the chant. "You would destroy everything for what you do not understand." Lucian rushed forward, but an invisible barrier threw him back against the stone wall. "I understand enough," Elsa shouted over the rising wind that had begun swirling through the catacombs. "I understand that a father's love shouldn't blind his child." She completed the final words of the incantation and pressed her bleeding palm against Arya's forehead. The spell ignited. Blinding light erupted from the circle, pure and terrible, washing over everything in silver radiance. Arya screamed, a sound of agony and awakening combined, as her eyes burst into flame, not red like vampire fire, but silver and gold like captured dawn. The binding shattered. Centuries of suppressed power exploded outward. The catacombs shook. Stone cracked. Ancient sarcophagi split open, spilling dust that had once been kings. Lucian tried again to reach his daughter, but divine force repelled him, throwing him backward with each attempt. "Arya!" he roared. "My child!" The light grew impossibly bright. Elsa shielded her eyes, but she could see Arya's silhouette in the center of the maelstrom. Small, fragile, transforming. The princess's screams gradually subsided, replaced by gasping breaths. Then, slowly, the light began to fade. The circle went dark. The wind died. Silence fell over the catacombs like a shroud. Arya stood in the center of the broken circle, swaying slightly. Her eyes, her beautiful, seeing eyes, no longer glowed with supernatural fire. They were clear now, pale blue like winter sky, the pupils contracting and dilating as they adjusted to true sight for the first time. She blinked, once, twice, then her gaze focused, on her father. "Father?" Arya whispered, her voice filled with wonder and confusion. Is that what you look like?" Lucian stood frozen, his face streaked with something that might have been tears. "Arya, my Arya, what have we done?" The curse was broken, and with it, everything was about to change. The tremors that shook the catacombs spread upward through the castle, and with them came something that hadn't touched Valamont stones in 7 centuries. Sunlight. It started as a single beam piercing through a crack in the eastern tower, striking a stained glass window that depicted the first Valamont king's coronation. The colored glass blazed to life, crimson, gold, sapphire, scattering rainbow light across the ancient halls. Then another beam broke through, and another, until the entire castle seemed to exhale darkness and breathe in dawn. Lucian climbed the stairs from the catacombs, moving slowly, his immortal strength already beginning to fade. He could feel it, the covenant breaking, the protection of endless night dissolving like mist. Arya and Elsa followed, the child clinging to her maid's hand as her new eyes struggled to comprehend the overwhelming beauty surrounding her. They reached the throne chamber just as the sun crested the horizon. Golden light flooded through the tall windows, and for the first time in centuries, Valamont Castle knew morning. The blue flames in the torches guttered and died, replaced by natural illumination that revealed every shadow, every hidden corner, every truth the darkness had concealed. Lucian stood at the threshold of the largest window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. His pale skin began to smoke where the light touched it, wisps rising from his hands and face. "Father, no." Arya rushed forward, but Elsa held her back. Lucien turned to his daughter, and despite the pain etched into his features, he smiled. "Now you see, my child, what I feared." His voice was fading, growing distant. "Not death, never death, but this, your freedom, your light. I feared it would take you from me. Please," Arya sobbed, tears streaming down her seeing eyes. "Don't leave me. I'm not leaving, beloved. I'm finally letting you go." Lucien stepped fully into the sunlight streaming through the window, his body ignited, not with screams or agony, but with quiet acceptance. Silver flames consumed him, turning flesh and bone to ash that drifted upward like snow falling in reverse. Within moments, nothing remained but a small pile of gray dust on the stone floor and a crown that clattered to rest beside it. The king of eternal night was gone. Arya collapsed to her knees, weeping, and Elsa knelt beside her, wrapping the child in her arms. Around them, the castle continued its transformation. Warmth flooded halls that had known only cold. Light reached corners that had festered in shadow for centuries. Outside, they could hear sounds of panic as other vampires fled the dawn or perished in it. But Arya barely noticed. She stared at the pile of ash that had been her father, her new vision making every detail heartbreakingly clear. "Look," Elsa whispered, turning Arya toward a large mirror on the wall. Arya saw herself, truly saw herself, for the first time. Pale blonde hair catching the sunlight, skin luminous in the dawn, and eyes, clear blue eyes that sparkled with tears and life and terrible. "Beautiful freedom. You did it," Elsa said, her voice trembling. Arya reached up to touch her own reflection, wonder mixing with grief. Then she looked toward the window where her father had stood, where golden light now painted everything it touched. "No," she said softly, her voice carrying a strength that hadn't been there before. "We did. Days passed. The castle stabilized. Some vampires had survived by retreating to the deepest chambers. Others had fled to caves beyond the valley. But the kingdom of eternal night had ended." Arya stood on the highest balcony, Elsa beside her, and looked out over Noctureth as the sun set in brilliant orange and purple. "I will rebuild this place," the young princess declared, "not as a kingdom of fear and darkness, but as something new. A place where night and day can coexist, where no one has to choose between survival and truth." Elsa squeezed her hand. "And I'll help you." Arya smiled, her first real smile, radiant as the dawn she'd finally been allowed to see. Together then, the mortal who brought light to the vampire's world, and the vampire who learned to see it. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, a new story began. One of healing, rebuilding, and a friendship forged in the breaking of ancient curses. When the blind child opened her eyes, the night itself learned to dream of morning. If you loved this story of courage and sacrifice, show us some love with a like and subscribe for more dark fantasy tales. What would you have done in Elsa's place? Let us know in the comments below.